we present the news quiz with your host, Miles Jupp.
Hello, and welcome to the news quiz. We start with an advert spotted on Facebook, read by Kathy Clugston.
Selgrave Manor May Day event, a fun-filled day for all the family. Crafts, garden trails, maypole dancing, pony rides, and lambs being bottled.
Our thanks to Howard Passy in Middleton Cheney for callously popping that over to us via email. Now, let's meet the teams. Will you welcome first on my right, Jeremy Hardy and Sarah Kendall. And opposite them on my left, Michael Deacon and Holly Walsh. So, Jeremy, what have people been putting in their boxes?
It's been elections for Welsh Assembly, Scottish Parliament, Police and Crime Commissioners, various mayors, including Mayor of London. Jeremy Corbyn, perhaps unwisely, said we're not going to lose any seats. I suspect he meant to say we're not out to lose seats, but he was, whatever he meant, he was clearly flustered. He doesn't like that doorstepping thing. He's not a grandstander. He's not enjoying that side of things. To be honest, I don't think I would like that. I mean, that sort of being harangued, having your home laid siege to. People going, Mr. Corbyn, it's snowing. Are you going to apologise? Mr. Corbyn, something's happened that you don't know about yet. Are you going to react? And when you do react, why won't you react faster than you're going to react? And in fact, why haven't you built a time machine so that you can go back in time and stop that thing? We broke Amy Winehouse and we can break you. Mr. Corbyn. But Labour predicted to do maybe not so well, partly because so many Labour MPs have been doing their best to sabotage the result so that they can then go for Corbyn. And they've been saying, well, he's unelectable, so that people will say, well, we can't vote for him, we were going to, but apparently he's unelectable. So we can't, which is self-fulfilling, isn't it? It's like saying, if Corbyn stays as leader, there will be more urine in pillar boxes. Well, who's going to urinate in all these pillar boxes? Well, me, obviously. That's who. So they're deliberately sabotaging it so that they can get rid of Corbyn. But we'll see what happens. Zach Goldsmith has been desperately sucking up to every ethnic community by sending things out in Pashto and Urdu and Farsi to anyone with a name that isn't double-barrelled. And it's just not flattering. It's kind of that Americanisation of British politics where you see people as a group and then you flatter that group, and it's just not that flattering. It's like a dog humping your leg. It's like, oh, he likes you. Well, in a way, but not in a way that I'm comfortable with. And people don't vote as a group. We keep talking about, the Jewish vote, the Muslim vote, the black vote, the white vote. We are all individuals. Say it after me, audience. We are all individuals. Exactly.
What about you, Sarah? Have you been allowed to vote?
No. I've been barred.
Right.
No, we actually had an election, and I don't vote here, but last time I was back in my hometown in Australia, and our local MP is called Richard Face. How do you like that? I know. He has been our local MP for like 30 years because everybody's just so amused.
Michael, have you had a...
What are you about to ask me?
Have you had a busy day politically?
Yeah, well, in my area of Kent, there's only one election going on, which is the PCC elections, Police and Crime Commissioner, and absolutely nobody votes in that, except me. I went down to my polling station in the morning, and genuinely, I was the only person who turned up, except for my 2-year-old son, just because I happened to be taking him to nursery. And for a moment, I thought, the turnout in PCC elections is so bad that if I wrote my 2-year-old son's name on the ballot paper, he could win this. And the police force for the entirety of Kent could be run by a toddler. So I did it, and we're just going to see what the results are.
When I turned up today, I thought I was just going in for the mayor, and then it was a bit like doing the exam and then realising there's 2 more questions that I wasn't prepared.
There is no way. I have to point out at this point that we're recording this on Thursday, so we don't yet know the full results. So any jokes that I make, for instance, about the identity of the West Mercia Police Crime Commissioner are at this point purely conjectural.
One thing we do know is that when this goes out, Boris Johnson will no longer be Mayor of London. He made a very emotional... very emotional little thing on the iron. He said it's been an immense privilege. Well, you'd know about that, Boris, wouldn't you?
It's been a messy old mayoral debate, though, hasn't it? It's just been mudslinging from either side. Very horrible. I've not enjoyed it. I wish we just could go back to the old way of choosing a mayor by who did best on Have I Got News for You? That seemed like the traditional way, and I used to know where I stood with my mayors then.
Now, anyone else know outside of London, and what about what's happening in Scotland?
Complete walkover by the SNP, probably. Tories might be in second place. Labour probably not do very well in Scotland.
And who can vote for the first time in Scotland?
16 and 17-year-olds. It is the first time that single malt whiskies have taken part in the electoral process.
Unspectacularly, this is the news that the nation has once again been thrilled by the opportunity to participate in local elections like a heroic gladiatorial bloodbath, but with the added aroma of freshly sharpened tiny pencils. Across the country, people have been voting for their local councillors in order to decide who they want to have the privilege of closing down their libraries in 6 months' time. In Scotland, 16 and 17-year-olds have been voting for the first time. Previously, they've had to persuade an older teenager to go into the polling station and vote for them. There have been concerns that there will be a low turnout for the police and crime commissioners' elections, simply on the ground that there's been no advertising for them. Nobody knows who's standing, what they stand for, or what a police and crime commissioner actually is. I assume it's the person who sends out the bat signal. 2 points to Jeremy. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but as we don't know the results of the elections yet, we need to record a few options so that we can edit this after the results are announced. So this is the news that the new Mayor of London is Zach Goldsmith. So this is the news that the new Mayor of London is Sadiq Khan. So this is the news that the new Mayor of London is Claudio Ranieri. So this is the news that the new Mayor of London is George no point in that. Sarah, who sat out in protest this week?
Yes, this is a story about there was a day of protest where parents took their kids out of school. I think the petition is let our kids be kids, and this is this idea that there's too much testing taking place in primary schools. And you know that the parents are serious about this because they took their children out of school for the day, and as any parent knows, that means that you'd have to have your kids at home with you for the entirety of the day. And no matter how much you love them, that is like being waterboarded. It is just...
In the past, when people have said, let our children be children, they mean different things. Some people of a religious bent mean people should not learn about sex until they find that they're doing it for the first time. Some people have this thing about, when I was young, we had none of this nanny state. We used to play out in fields and streams, unsupervised from dawn till dusk. Yeah, that was neglect. They got the schools minister, Nick Gibb, on, and they messed him up in the morning, like presenters like to do, because I think it was on the Today programme when people are barely awake, and he didn't know the answer to a grammar question, which I didn't know the answer to either, and he sort of said, I don't know, I wasn't very well educated, leave me alone, call me old-fashioned.
That question was hard.
It was hard, I didn't
I thought it actually flagged up how ridiculous the tests were.
I assumed it's because I was Australian that I was the one going, I've got no idea how that would... I assumed all British people would go, oh, please.
I actually think taking your kid out of school for a really good cause like that is a brilliant piece of education. I think to teach your kids about the importance of striking is amazing. I think that's brilliant. I think that they should start a kids' union. I think that would be...
Can you imagine what they'd fight for?
They would be like, we are anti your broccoli policies. You know, they'd be like, minimum pocket money for everyone. Like,
would we have to pay more pocket money so that they could afford their subs, though? I mean, they'd be completely reliant on us.
It's scroungers, frankly. No. You know, I've got a 2-year-old son, hasn't done a day's work in his life. It's like entirely living off me. I say that
will change when he becomes the crime commissioner for...
I think so.
One of the biggest rallies was down in Brighton where loads of kids turned up and the children's poet laureate turned up to speak to them, and I thought that is the most Brighton thing I've ever heard in my life.
Does the children's poet laureate do stuff specially for Prince George? Is that what he does?
Is that his job?
No, it's all children, but he probably has his own individual poet who comes and, I don't know, does nice couplets about what charming knickerbockers he's wearing, or... worth every penny, I dare say. Octagonally, this is the kids' strike that was held this Tuesday in protest at the government's SAT tests. Although, given that the strike involved parents keeping their children at home with them all day, it seems reasonable to ask who this industrial action is really hurting. Instead of going to school, parents took their children to parks for a day of storytelling, writing, art and yoga in what is being called an alternative day of learning, or, as I'm calling it, why China is winning. BBC News interviewed several parents about their reasons for supporting the strike, including Simone, who has a 7-year-old and an 11-year-old, and Rashida, who has 3 children whose ages combined are twice those the mean age of Simone's children. 2 points to Sarah. Michael, who is for turning?
I think this is to do with David Cameron and refugee children. So I'd just like to thank you for giving me a story that is so rich in comic possibility. But anyway,
we are all ears, Michael.
I'll try and answer it. Basically, until Wednesday, David Cameron's view was that Britain should not take in any refugee children, or at least unaccompanied refugee children that had made it from the Middle East into the EU. I mean, we were sending lots of aid money to refugees in camps in the Middle East, but we weren't going to take in any refugee children. And then at Prime Minister's Questions on Wednesday, he announced he was making a U-turn on that. Now, he didn't say why he was doing that, although I did note that the Daily Mail, believe it or not, had been actively campaigning on its front page for Britain to start taking in loads of refugee children. So I don't know whether on Wednesday morning David Cameron woke up and thought, I see that the Daily Mail is berating me for showing a lack of compassion. I, somehow, am significantly to the right of the Daily Mail. Now, either the Daily Mail has suddenly and unexpectedly been taken over by Russell Brand, or maybe I'm a touch too hardline on this issue. I don't know. So it may have been to do with that, or it may have been because next week there was going to be a vote in the Commons about this, and the government was going to lose because something like 30 Tory MPs were going to rebel against David Cameron and vote for refugee children to come in, which just goes to show, when you're facing an embarrassing defeat in the Commons, it's remarkable how quickly you're really in touch with your principles all of a sudden. The main principle being self-preservation, really. So I'm just guessing that's what's happened.
Do you think Cameron's like, I would love to microwave that kitten. Let me just check with the backbenchers what they think of that.
And Nicholas Soames says no, so it's out.
Anxiously, this is David Cameron's partial U-turn on the subject of child refugees. Up to 3,000 children will now be allowed into this country to enjoy a glorious paradise of under-resourced healthcare, incredibly complicated grammar testing, and Mr. Tumble. Cameron has, in fact, managed to do the right thing, but for all the wrong reasons, very much like peering through the net curtains and finding that the naked madman wielding a samurai sword has, whilst admittedly causing something of a lethal kerfuffle, also inadvertently managed to trim the overhanging branches of your neighbour Jeff's Leylandii. Cameron was previously accused of abandoning 3,000 children, bringing his personal tally to 3,001. 2 points to Michael. Holly, who has cruised out of contention?
I've really enjoyed the latest season of American politics. It's been brilliant, hasn't it? I mean, Ted Cruz has hung up his gloves, would that be the word? Is that
Campaign slippers.
Campaign slippers. Yes, Ted Cruz and John Kasich have suspended their campaigns, which means that Donald Trump is going to be the main candidate for the Republican Party. I can't quite believe this has happened. I'd say Donald Trump has to be the most flammable man I have ever seen. And it's just mad to think that this has happened, that he's just this guy who's made a career out of being a celebrity. That's how bored people are with politicians. I think we get that a bit in this country, that they would rather vote for a reality star who just offends people than they would in any way somebody who's a credible political force.
There was a brilliant quote on CNN by Donald Trump, which I think sums him up, and it maybe sums up his appeal, I don't know. But anyway, he said, and he's been quite serious, "I've sacrificed a tremendous amount to run for president. I gave up 2 more seasons of Celebrity Apprentice."
It probably will be the first time the FBI have ever assassinated someone for being too right-wing. But I mean, the reason that he's done well is just he has got that sort of like, you know, off-message thing going. He's like Farage with concussion. People don't judge him as a politician. They judge him as a personality, which works for Farage. It's worked for Boris. That thing of being judged as a personality. Whatever Boris says or does, well, that's Boris. Well, what's that supposed to? That's Harold Chipman. I mean, you know, what you see is what you get. You know.
I think that we also, I mean, to be fair to Donald Trump, he only started out, guys. To be fair, he only started out with an inheritance of 800 million. And I think it just goes to show that in America, if you work hard and you inherit 800 million, the sky's the limit. I mean, he's a real poster boy for inheriting 800 million.
I think the eerie thing about Donald Trump is that when he waves his arms around, he looks like a giant inflatable version of himself. Always has.
Oh, like those things that you get outside car lots in America.
Yeah.
That
There's a sale on at the Donald Trump warehouse.
He is the most unpopular candidate there's ever been, and the second most unpopular candidate there's ever been is Hillary. So it is the battle of the most unpopular. And people really don't like. And the weird thing is, if she wins, she will be called, presumably, Mrs. President, which just sounds silly, doesn't it? It's like being called Mrs. Santa Claus. It just doesn't sound like a proper thing.
Well, maybe she'll go with Ms. President and then sound like sexy.
Yeah, that's...
You know, like, is she married? Isn't she married? Who cares? She's president.
But she already was Mrs. President. That's kind of the point, isn't it?
No, she was
the first
President
lady.
plus one. The First Lady. That was Eve.
That's true.
She should be called the Second Lady. They should do it, whatever president it is, it should be the number of ladies.
Will Bill be called?
He'll be the first man, won't he? He'll be the first man.
It's got to happen, just for that.
But it'd be first man once removed, because he's already been president, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah, how's that going to work?
I think this is one of the questions in the SAT tests.
I feel slightly sorry for Ted Cruz, not because I like him, I don't. But there's this video going around of him this week. He's at a rally, I think it is, and he's greeting a load of people afterwards, shaking their hands. And there's just a member of the crowd that shouts out, Mr. Cruz, can I shake your hand? And he reaches out, and the guy just withdraws it and said, "Ha, too slow, dude. You look like a fish monster." Even Ted Cruz doesn't say.
No, that sounds exactly like what Donald Trump would tweet.
What did Trump say about Ted Cruz's family this week?
That his dad had killed Lee Harvey Oswald or something.
Yeah, he was friends with, that he'd been pictured, there was a picture in the National Enquirer of Ted Cruz's father.
On the moon.
On the moon. on the moon. No, but I think that they had been seen pamphleteering together the day before JFK was shot. I think there was something about him, and I don't know if the photo...
It's because I think he was pro-Castro because he's Cuban.
Right. And then he changed and became like a devout anti-communist. And this is Ted Cruz's father.
That's what they want you to think.
That was the narrative.
It's a very evil laugh from the Whoa! Christ, we've got a Bond villain in the front row.
Verbally, this is the decision of Ted Cruz and John Kasich to suspend their campaigning against Donald Trump for what they describe as the Republican presidential nomination, but to all outside observers looks more like a hotly contested race to be judged the most appalling man in the world. I know a lot of Radio 4 listeners won't have been keeping up with the American politics, so I'll just quickly bring you up to speed. We have lost the colonies. Anyway, Americans now have to choose who they'd rather have in charge, a former Secretary of State who can never seem to remember which email account she's logged into, or a man who believes everything he reads on the internet. Whatever happens, I think it's safe to say that it was a pleasure knowing you all. Let's take a moment to grab some tins and we'll reconvene in the bunker. 2 points to Holly. And at the end of round 1, the scores are Jeremy and Sarah have 4, and so too do Michael and Holly. We start round 2 with a cutting from the Bristol Observer.
Bristolians will once again be stripping off and getting on their bikes as part of the World Naked Bike Ride. This year's event will be taking place on Saturday, June the 4th, and will set off at 11 a.m. from the Full Moon pub.
Thanks to Julian Niosh and JC Ward for sending us that. Jeremy, have a listen to this.
Only the sharpest eye, the keenest nose, the quickest ear and fleetest toes can ever outfox the fox.
They'll never outfox the fox.
Only the stoutest arm, the bravest heart, with a magic charm and a good head start will ever outfox the fox.
They'll never outfox the fox.
Those who try to tangle with my...
Jeremy, who has outfoxed their rivals?
Foxed as in the foxes. See, I got it right. Even though I am the Zeta male on the panel. But I know about as much as David Cameron, who very thrilled to praise his new favourite team, Leicester Wednesday United. Fine exponents of the ordinary person's game of kick rugby. Why don't they pick up the ball? Must be something to do with social housing. But Leicester, who came from being at the start of a season, it was just one 8-year-old child, and then eventually they got older, and then there were 11 of them, and then they won every game in the world and scored more runs than any other team, and won the league of footballness. And Sarah won't know because she's Australian.
It's exciting stuff.
But in Australia, football's played naked underwater with knives, isn't it?
True. I love it. I love sport, though. Love it when a team wins. Because you got all these other teams and they're all trying, but they didn't get it. And then the team that wins gets a big cup. It's electrifying stuff.
I wish they actually just got a big cup like those ones you get from Sports Direct when you walk up. What I love about this is I think I like it. I mean, I love this story. And I'm not a Leicester fan at all, but their main player is this guy called Vardy, who looks like he's only ever eaten crisps.
That's what football used to be like, and then it all became about being like healthy and strong and good at sport. See, this is what has ruined sport. I mean, when I did follow sport, when I was a kid, people were just sort of quite good, and people used to smoke on the touchline and eat pies before a penalty. McEnroe never practiced, and now it's all these boring machine-like people that know if you exercise your left eyebrow for so many hours a day, it'll improve your throwing hair follicle. And I just think, and as soon as they crack down on drugs in sport, you know, it's ruined it. It's like the marathon. You think, just get in your bloody car.
I do agree with you, though. The old days of sport. Like, I remember reading this thing about David Boone.
Who's he?
He's a cricketer.
Okay.
He's an Australian cricketer, and he broke the world record for drinking the most amount of beers on a flight. But he did it the night before the Ashes. Like, he was flying over for the Ashes, and he got off the plane like he'd done it. You'd know this, or was it 100?
Yeah, he drank 56 tins of
beer.
Appalling lager.
Yeah, on a flight.
It wouldn't have been the night before. You don't fly in the night before a game from...
Okay, it's like a story, Miles.
I just feel on a programme whose remit is the news, even if we're talking about something that happened in the late 80s, we might as well do it with a reasonable degree of accuracy.
All right, so it was about 3 days before the Ashes started.
In those days, of course, they did a long tour of counties before the international fixtures.
Jeremy, it was right before a long tour of counties.
Unrelatedly, this is the story of unfancied Leicester City shocking the world of football by winning the Premier League. Football fans the world over were delighted by the plucky underdog story of 11 millionaires fighting their way past a lot of slightly richer millionaires. Leicester players have achieved the one thing they have been striving for their entire lives, and one must assume that now, like bumblebees, they will simply die. No, it's a lovely story, and I only wish Leicester's most famous resident, Richard III, could have lived to see it. Grotesquely aged, baffled by the world around him, and sitting in an executive box screaming, "Why won't you let me die?" in Middle English. It's not just sporting achievement in Leicester, of course. The University of Leicester was instrumental in the invention of genetic fingerprinting, while De Montfort University is revered in English academic life as one of the top 5 universities in the Leicester area. 2 points to Jeremy. Sarah, why has the sun set on a new day?
This is the story about the Trinity Mirror had to close one of its newspapers. They had a paper called The New Day, and it was meant to be. I think they kept on being described as an experimental paper, and they've had to close. And they're blaming all sorts of different things, like they're saying it was the weird pricing and various other reasons. But I just think if you're going to start an experimental paper, like if I was starting an experimental paper, I think you've got to make it really experimental. I think you've got to go for it. I think, have one edition written in lipstick backwards on a mirror. You could have the runic alphabet edition. Vendors who are only called denim. Just go for it. It just sounds like they weren't. If you're going to be experimental, you've got to burst into that market and really, you get the gist of what I'm saying.
How many people had heard of this newspaper?
Yeah, that's one of the problems with White Folded.
By way
literally,
of noise,
yeah.
any noise, anyone that had heard of a newspaper that had existed?
Yeah.
Anyone buy a copy? That was louder. That should have been much louder than the people that hadn't.
That's because they get all their news from us.
Oh, right. God, bad news for football fans.
This is true. I was reading an article in The Guardian this morning, and I went to scroll down with my finger and then realised I was actually reading a real newspaper. And I don't know if that makes me senile or infantile.
Yes.
What's you work in the print media, Michael, what is how do people feel about this?
Well, I mean, obviously as a journalist I feel quite sad about it, although, I can see why it didn't work, because it was never really clear with the New Day.
That's a much better title.
Shall I say that again? It was never really clear with the New Day who exactly it was aimed at, really, because it was tabloid, but it was also quite worthy. I mean, particularly on the front page, there was a real lack of, sex and celebrities and offensive opinions. And it kind of made me think that, it looks as if it's been designed by a focus group. Because if you went to a focus group and said, we're going to launch a tabloid newspaper, what would you like to read in it? No one round that table is going to say, well, I want to read about sex and celebrities and offensive opinions. That's the kind of thing I like. I love that kind of stuff. Because people aren't going to admit that to, a table full of strangers, or even probably to themselves. If you ask people what they want in a tabloid newspaper, they would probably say, oh, well, I would like some serious stories about important issues. That's the kind of thing for me. I certainly don't want any of that celebrity tittle-tattle and that kind of rubbish. But of course, that's what New Day tried to do. They tried to be quite a worthy tabloid, and nobody bought it. Which just reminds you, of one of the great rules of publishing, which is to give people what they want, not what they say they want, because there's a bloody massive difference between those two.
The New Day described itself as being for women and men. It's just a sort of patronising way of saying people. Did you come across this paper, Holly?
I didn't see it at all. I don't know. I don't really know why you would launch a paper, given that even within a month of the Independent paper, that was really recently that shut down. Why you would? I mean, I imagine the investors have decided that they're not going to put their money into printed newspapers and are going to try and get that fax machine business up and running. I just think it's sad, though, that the newspapers are going. You know what I've realised is that I don't have newspapers around my house. Like, if I need a newspaper for a DIY job, like, my parents' dog is in heat at the moment, right? Not the magazine, but...
Put on weight, has it?
Yeah, this is a close-up of its cellulite. But I I went to their house and there's just all this newspaper down so the dog is sort of safe to, do what it has to do all over the house. And I just sort of think, what would we do if we didn't have newspapers? Would we just have to print out endless pages of Twitter just to lie in?
Shame that you can't get a paper copy of TripAdvisor anymore, isn't it?
I just want to say, while you're all being so very negative about print, that, of course, the Daily Telegraph is going from strength to strength. And, in fact, from this weekend, I am the new restaurant critic.
Ooh. You just said it was going from strength to strength, Michael.
If that doesn't send subscriptions through the roof, I don't know what will.
It's very thorough, the Telegraph, because it's a very rich paper. They have correspondence everywhere. Whereas the Guardian has, an abroad correspondent. The Telegraph has a sort of East Dorset correspondent. And it's incredibly detailed, the Telegraph. It's great if you want to know a lot about rural England, but then actually you don't. If you've seen Straw Dogs, that's pretty much all you need to know.
Are you having to just review... is your remit that you have to review only the home counties restaurants, or are you able to go out to the Midlands?
Restaurants of rank,
I'm going to be reviewing every table at the Ritz, every single one, week by week.
Are you allowed to take someone with you and pay for them?
In theory, I would, no one wants to come, but yeah.
And also...
Are you angling, Jeremy?
No, I just wondered, because it could be a bit miserable if you just sort of sat there with your notebook on your own in the restaurant.
Describing every restaurant as very lonely.
A heartbreakingly silent atmosphere, 2 stars.
Lightly, this is the demise after a mere 9 weeks of daily newspaper, The New Day. Me neither. I present a show about the news, and even I have never heard of this newspaper. The New Day set out to be non-partisan, not wanting to preach to anyone, in which aim it has succeeded. Almost too well. The New Day started at 10p, then it went to 20p, then 25p, then 50p, in what appears to be a cruel misunderstanding of the laws of economic supply and demand. We heard that the New Day was closing a couple of days ago, yet the flag at Buckingham Palace continues to fly at full mast, and Her Majesty remains cruelly indifferent to the grief of her subjects. Show us you care, ma'am. How different the world was when the New Day published its first edition. Leicester were top of the league, the Conservatives were tearing themselves apart, and my hair was 1/3 of an inch shorter. If you want to find out more about the New Day, there are lots of articles online, which I suppose is the problem. 2 points to Sarah. Michael, who is enjoying the sweet smell of success?
A farmer in Devon, I think, has come up with a revolutionary new invention, which is socks that don't smell. These are socks that you could wear every day for a year and they would not smell. And they're made of this special wool from goats. I think it's Angora goats or baby Angora goats, kids. What are they called? Anyway, basically, Angora wool, and I don't know the science of this. I think it's something to do with, this particular wool doesn't trap the bacteria that causes your feet to smell. And so basically, anyway, it sounds like a fantastic invention. Socks that never smell, however many times you wear them, and you don't need to wash them. But in the stories I've read about this, it only mentions this guy selling socks. And I think there are so many other items of clothing you could sell. Made of this stuff. This guy's sitting on a gold mine here. Angora underpants, which you would never have to change and would never smell. Or, even better, Angora nappies. You would never have to change your baby's nappy for an entire year.
I think
it would be a great time saver.
You'd need to empty them, though, wouldn't you?
Well, they would have to be very accommodating. A nappy about the size of a small lorry, but even so, saves so much time.
Can I just say, I would love to see the two of you on the QVC shopping channel. I have never seen two people less interested in a product and yet trying to summon up the...
I'm very interested in this, Holly. What an appalling thing to say.
Do you have stinky feet?
No, but I always wear very breathable shoes.
All the people that said... the thing is, the evidence they took that they don't smell was the people saying, I wore them for a year and my feet don't smell. And you think, yeah, but that's not an objective assessment, is it? It's like when someone says, I don't need to wear deodorant. And you think, yeah, I kind of knew that about you for some reason.
And I love the way it's described, how they go, people have come in and they've boasted that they haven't washed their socks for a year. Like, who boasts? Who's going to set up at a dinner party? So I go, everyone, you're not going to believe this. Haven't washed my socks for a year. I'm doing okay. Things are going kind of great for me, actually. Like if someone said, I haven't washed my socks for a year, you'd go, OK, things are kind of falling apart for you right now.
It's not like they're a difficult item to wash, is it? Unless they're like... Probably those Angora ones are that are made from tiny baby miniature unicorns that don't exist. But generally, you just bung socks in the washing machine. Admittedly, only half of them come out again. But you do...
Do you know how many socks a month Britons lose in the wash?
4.
84 million.
Is that number exactly half?
That is the total number of individual socks, but it also represents the total number of pairs.
We, as a country, lose 84 million socks a month.
A month.
That's so many socks.
It's a lot. It's actually a vital part of our economy. If we all started just having one pair of socks we wore all the time, that'd be yet another of our industries gone.
I mean, that's like if you flew over the ocean between here and America, there'd be like an entire island of socks. That's ridiculous. Where do they go? No, I can't deal with this. This is too much. Where are you suggesting 84 million socks?
If I knew where they went, Holly, it wouldn't be such a problem. I would personally return them to people as long as they use name tapes.
This is what happens when someone picks apart your story. This is exactly what happens.
No, I completely stand by it. That's how many get lost, and it's a tragedy, and I can't believe you're making light of it, Holly.
I feel like if the New Day newspaper had led with this on their front page, it might still be here today.
I don't think even the demise of the New Day newspaper was on the front page of the New Day newspaper. Prohibitively, this is the news that Steve Whitley, a farmer in East Devon, claims to be able to produce socks that do not smell. The socks are currently being trialled by Fiona Bruce, Bear Grylls and Stephen Fry. Of course, at the time of recording, we don't know the results of those trials, but we'll bring them to you next week, along with the eagerly anticipated outcome of the Police and Crime Commissioner elections. I do have to say that if a farmer has been reduced to inventing socks, it suggests that EU subsidies are not doing the job that they're supposed to. The farmer has also invented trousers made from cows that smell extraordinarily of beef. 2 points to Michael. Holly, for whom is there little evidence?
Oh, this is one of those unbelievably stupid stories that comes around whereby scientists have proven that borrowers, the tiny made-up children's characters, could not have ever existed. There is absolutely no way, biologically, physically, whatever, that a borrower could have been real. And when these sort of stories come up, I always think, what are you doing working... Like, if you have found a cure for AIDS... and then you have a bit of time left over, that is when a scientist is allowed to work this stuff out. You should not be allowed to do these kind of calculations unless you've done something incredible and solved some serious problems. I was reading the article, and there was a list of other things that scientists had helpfully proven. One of them was that Pinocchio would have broken his neck after 13 lies. Spider-Man would have needed a 43-inch hand to stick to a wall.
I so thought you were going to say something else then. I don't know.
And that Miley Cyrus could not have come in like a wrecking ball and survived the injury.
And, Jeremy, do you think this borrower denialism is just another attempt by the right wing of the Labour Party to smear the leadership?
I think it's a shame because didn't they say that they would freeze to death, borrowers, because the surface area to volume ratio of tiny things is much higher and they would freeze, and that their ears would be too close together and therefore their eyes would be too close together so you couldn't trust them. All sorts of, it's not actually feasible. It's like a giant. A giant wouldn't work because it would collapse and things like that. That's why we have bad backs, because we're not evolved properly. Our spines are too long, and our spines are designed for walking on all fours, as you know, Miles.
I need to reveal my entire skill set, Jeremy. Orthodontically, this is the news that, and I can scarcely believe that this even needs saying, it would have been scientifically impossible for beloved children's characters, the borrowers, to exist. This was according to research published in the Journal of Interdisciplinary Science Topics. Other findings of the research team include confirmation at last that Mrs. Rabbit couldn't have sewn Peter's buttons on his waistcoat because she doesn't have opposable digits. And evidence they've uncovered suggests that the clanger landings were quite possibly faked. Sorry to break it to you, but there we are. If you think you've seen a borrower, it was probably just a normal person that was standing further away than you realised. Perhaps they were holding a very large button. If you're worried that you stepped on one, relax. It was probably just yet another mouse wearing clothes. That said, stuff is still going missing, and there are a lot of wombles out there with fewer and fewer places left to shift the blame. Personally, I've always hated the idea of borrowers. Magical or not, a thief is a thief, and sentencing should reflect that. The idea that such small people could exist always seemed unlikely, but then, of course, we're all tiny, aren't we, in comparison to the hegemony of the military-industrial complex that determines the outcome of all of our lives. 2 points to Holly. Before we reveal the final scores, has anybody got a cutting that they'd like to share?
Miles, this was sent in by Josh Irving, and it was spotted in the Financial Times. It's from a story about Wentworth Golf Club. Among those who have donated to the legal campaign to fight the changes is Russ Abbott, the comedian, and former wife of Sir Nick Faldo.
Sarah.
This was a BBC TV listing sent in by Damien Chapman, The Great British Railway Journeys. Michael Portillo visits Birmingham's Town Hall and reveals a magnificent organ.
Michael.
Mark Daly Wilson and Janet Jenkins found this in the Nottingham Post. A professional boxing event due to take place at Rushcliffe Leisure Centre on May the 7th has been cancelled after police received reports of a possible threat of violence.
Thank you, and now let's take a look at the final score. Jeremy and Sarah have 8, but this week's winners are Michael and Holly with 9. Before we leave you, here is an announcement from the Blackmore Vale magazine sent in by Becky and Tim Hamer.
The familiar face of Donna Benjafield will be returning to Gillingham High Street. Donna, who previously managed the local pet shop, is to bring some new and exciting ideas to her new role at Prime Cuts Butchers.
And with that, goodbye.
Taking part in the news quiz were Jeremy Hardy, Sarah Kendall, Michael Deacon and Holly Walsh. In the chair was Miles Jupp and the news was read by me, Cathy Clugston. The chair's script was written by Gabby Hutchinson-Crouch, James Kettle and Andy Walton, with additional material by Liam Byrne and Mike Shepherd. The producer was Richard Morris.